Have you ever walked into a building and just thought about it? Probably not, right? We use them every day without a second thought. But behind every single wall, every door, there's this invisible set of rules that's working to keep us safe. Today, we're going to decode that blueprint and get a real understanding of India's building codes.
So let's start with a really basic question. What actually separates a safe building from a dangerous one? You might think, well, it's the materials they use, right? Or maybe the design, or where it's built. The thing is, it's all of that, and a whole lot more. And every single detail is governed by a set of rules we're about to dive into. To really get how buildings are regulated, we've got to get the language right first. And it all boils down to two key terms: codes and standards. Now, they sound pretty similar, don't they? But in the world of construction, they play totally different roles.
And the difference is actually pretty simple. A code is the law. It's mandatory. You absolutely have to follow it, no exceptions. Think of it as the building's operating system. It's non-negotiable and it's all about safety. A standard, on the other hand, is more like a recommended guideline. It's the benchmark for what high quality and great performance look like, but it's not always legally required.
Okay, so if codes are the law, then what's the ultimate law book for construction here in India? Well, it all comes down to one single massive document known as the NBC.
The National Building Code, or NBC for short, is the master document. It's published by the Bureau of Indian Standards, and this is the rule book that every architect, engineer, and builder in the country has to live by. When it comes to building safety and design, the NBC is the final word. Now, the NBC is huge. It has 12 parts, but let's just zoom in on 4 of the really critical ones. You've got Part 3, which basically tells you how high you can build and how much space you need to leave around your building. Then there's Part 4, which is probably one of the most important: fire and life safety. The rules that help you get out alive. Part 8 covers all the services that make a building usable, like good lighting and fresh air. And Part 9 deals with all the plumbing, making sure water goes where it should and doesn't go where it shouldn't.
Okay, so you've got this giant rule book, but how do you know which rules apply to which building? I mean, a hospital has completely different safety needs than a warehouse, right? So where do you even start?
This is where the code gets really smart. The first thing you have to do is classify a building by its occupancy, which is just a fancy way of saying what it's used for. This single decision is so important because it sets the stage for all the other rules that follow. Why? Because a building's use is directly tied to the level of risk for the people inside.
The NBC sorts all buildings into 9 groups, from A to J. So for example, your house or apartment, that's a group A, residential. The office you go to every day, that's group E, business. That mall you hang out at on the weekend, that's group F, mercantile. And each of these groups has its own very specific safety rules based on what happens inside.
And hey, for anyone out there studying for architecture or civil service exams, you'll want to pay close attention here. This is a super common topic. A great little trick to remember these 9 categories is the mnemonic REIABMISH. That's residential, educational, institutional, assembly, business, and so on. Definitely a handy one to keep in your back pocket.
All right, let's zero in now on the parts of the code that are most critical, the rules designed to save lives when a disaster like a fire or an earthquake strikes. This is where things get really serious. Here's a concept that might actually save your life one day. It's called travel distance. The idea is simple. If there's a fire, what's the maximum distance you should ever have to run to get to an exit? The code is incredibly strict about this because this distance isn't just measured in meters, it's measured in seconds. It can be the difference between a safe escape and a real tragedy.
So for a residential building, like an apartment block, the absolute maximum travel distance from anywhere on a floor to the nearest stairway or exit is 30 meters. This number wasn't just picked out of a hat. It's carefully calculated based on how quickly a fire might spread in a home and how long it takes for people to react.
But check this out. For a business or office building, that distance actually goes up to 45 meters. So why the difference? Well, the thinking is that offices are usually more open, people are awake and alert, and they often have better safety systems like fire alarms and sprinklers, which gives you a bit more time to get out. Now let's switch gears to earthquakes. India is divided into 4 seismic zones. It starts at Zone 2, which is low risk, and goes all the way up to Zone 5, which is for areas with a very severe risk of earthquakes. And here's a fun fact. You might notice there's no Zone 1. That's because it was actually merged into Zone 2 a while back, just to make the safety standards even tougher. The code requires that every building has to be designed to handle the kind of shaking it's likely to face.
So, we've talked about the mandatory rules, the absolute baseline for keeping people safe. But what about building for a better, more sustainable future? Well, that's where we move beyond just codes and into the exciting world of green building standards. Now, these aren't laws, but they're becoming incredibly important benchmarks for sustainable building. A lot of people know about the global standard LEED, but India has also developed its own really powerful systems. There's GRIHA, which is the national rating system that uses a 1 to 5-star scale, and there's the Indian Green Building Council, or IGBC, which uses a platinum and gold system, kind of like LEED.
All right, that was a whole lot of information. So, what do you say we see what's stuck? Let's do a super quick knowledge check with a couple of questions based on everything we just covered. You ready for this? Okay, first question up. According to the National Building Code, where does a shopping mall fit in? Which occupancy classification would that be? Take a second and think about it. And the answer is Group F, mercantile. If you got that, nice job. The key word to remember is merchandise. A mall is all about the buying and selling of goods, and that's what puts it in this category. All right, question number 2. This one is a real test of your attention to detail. Which seismic zone was officially removed from the Indian standards for earthquake-resistant buildings? That's right, it was Zone I. It got merged into Zone 2, which was a great move because it effectively raised the minimum safety standards for even the least earthquake-prone parts of the country. And that's pretty much it. We've peeled back the layers on the invisible rules that literally shape the world around us. So I'll just leave you with this final thought. The next time you walk into a building, look down a long hallway, or notice a fire exit sign, what are you going to see differently? Because you're not just looking at a building anymore. You're seeing the code in action. Thanks for tuning in.